Hello my montage minions and welcome back to the MONTAGE M Demystified video series. When I was reviewing my previous video on control assignments for MONTAGE M, I realised that there's more ground to cover and a few things where some more explanation and examples would be useful, so this is a second control assignment video to help you really master the subject. I'm going to be building on concepts and methods I described in the previous video, so if you haven't already watched that video, now would be the time to go back and do so. I've left a link in the description and up there. This time around, I'll start with another look at the super knob assignment shortcut, then go back over how to reattach common knob assignments to parts merged into the current performance, and finally take a look at how to replumb some assignments from preset performances to suit your own needs. Let's get started. The first assignment I made in the previous video maps the filter cutoff for an ANX part directly to the super knob. Let's remind ourselves of how to make that assignment before looking in a little more detail at what Montage is doing behind the scenes. I've got my simple ANX pad here that I made in the previous video, but I've stripped it back to the point before I made any control assignments. To make the assignment, I'm going to click on part 1 and open navigation. From here, I'm going to click on the filter and select the cutoff. I'll reduce the cutoff amount somewhat so that the control has more headroom to work with. And then with the cutoff selected, the control assign button has lit up, so I'm going to click it. This brings up the destination parameter dialog, and from here I can just move the super knob and the assignment is made. I'll tidy up the assignment by telling it to only affect filter 1 and we're done. We can now move the super knob and hear the filter being opened and closed. Looking at the assignable knobs for part 1, we can see the first assignable knob moving when we move the super knob. So we know that the shortcut has attached itself to that knob at the part level, and that's confirmed by the source on the display which shows assign knob 1. If we select common, we can see that assign knob 1 at the common level is pointing to part 1 assign 1. So if I move the super knob, it will move that assignable knob, which in turn moves the first assignable knob for part 1, which is where the filter is actually controlled. I want to explain a little more about how that assignment chain got set up. And to do that, I'm going to quickly make a few more control assignments. Let's go to the Common Effects panel and assign the common reverb return level to the second assignable knob at the common level. Next, we'll do the same for the common variation return level and assign that to the third assignable knob. Let's quickly use destination to name for all three of those common knob assignments so we can see what we're doing in the sub-display. Selecting part 1 again, let's head to navigation, go to the filter and assign the resonance to the second assignable knob for the part. Again, I'm going to use destination to name for these assignments, so the sub-display shows labels for the assigned knobs. Let's just summarize what we've set up. At the common level, we have 3 knobs assigned, controlling the part 1 cutoff and the common reverb and variation return levels. For part 1, we've made assignments for the first 2 knobs, controlling the cutoff and resonance for the filter, respectively. So what happens when we use the super knob assignment shortcut again? Back in the navigation overview, I'm going to select an oscillator and then assign the sync pitch to the super knob. I'll clean that up slightly so that it only affects one of the oscillators ever so slightly. And now I can move the super knob and control both the filter cutoff and the sync pitch at the same time. But how have the assignable knobs been used? Looking at the control assign display, we can see that oscillator sync pitch has a source of assign knob 3. Let's give that a label quickly, and we can see that it has added that assignment just after the cutoff and resonance assignments that we previously set up. If we jump back to the common part and select the assignment that points to part 1 assign 3, which is our new sync pitch destination, it tells us that the source is common assign knob 4. Let's label that up, and once again it's clear that what has happened here is that the super knob assignment shortcut has used the first unassigned knob at both the common and the part level to create the control chain. We originally had the first 3 common knobs assigned, so the shortcut used the 4th. And at the part level, we used knobs 1 and 2, so the shortcut used knob 3. Let's throw in a second ANX part. I'm just going to use the ANX init performance. I'm going to make an assignment to control its fine pitch, but before I do so, I should mention that if there are no unassigned common knobs with superknob link enabled, the superknob shortcut will fail with a message saying assignable knob full. So you must ensure that you have not only unassigned knobs, but they must also have superknob link enabled in order to use the superknob assignment shortcut. I'll quickly demo that by turning off superknob link for all of the unassigned common knobs. And then with part 2, I'll go to navigation, grab an oscillator, select its pitch, and try to assign that to the superknob. And there's the error. Common knobs 5, 6, 7, and 8 have no assignments and could have been used for the superknob assignment shortcut if they had superknob link enabled. So let's just restore superknob link to knob 7 and try to redo that assignment. We'll go to navigation, grab a filter, pitch, control assign superknob, and now we have made that assignment. If we look at the common assignment for that, we can see that the shortcut has used common assign knob 7 because that was the first unassigned common knob with superknob link. And at the part level, it's assigned it to knob 1 because there were no other assignments made to any of the part level knobs. To reiterate then, when using the superknob assignment shortcut, the system will add the selected destination to the first unassigned part level knob, and then it will find the first unassigned but superknob linked common knob and point that at the part level knob. Even though it's possible to manually stack multiple assignments onto knobs, the superknob shortcut will never do that, and it will only ever use completely unassigned knobs at both the part and the common level. Next, I want to talk a little more about reattaching common knob assignments and superknob behaviors to parts that have been merged into the current performance. As you'll recall from the previous video, when you bring parts from other performances into the current performance, while all their part level control assignments are preserved, any assignments made to the common assignable knobs or the superknob are lost. So you have to manually recreate the relationships if you want to restore the functionality. Let's dump that second ANX part and import the Apollo performance. I'll drop the volume of part 1 way down so we can hear Apollo clearly, and then let's go ahead and restore its common assignments. Now, I demonstrated this in the previous video when I imported CFX2 Dark and FM Lately Bass, and I mentioned that it's useful to have either a notepad or a copy of E.S.P handy as a reference, so you can see the assignments that were made. But what I could have made clearer is that this is only in order to see what common assignments are made, because the actual configuration of each destination is retained. Let me show you what I mean by reattaching all the destinations for Apollo. Looking at E.S.P, I can see that the first common assignable knob has 2 destinations, those being part 1 assign 1 and part 1 assign 5. We've already used the first 4 assignable knobs at the common level, so I'm going to need to use the 5th common knob here. And because Apollo part 1 actually lives in part 2 of this performance, we'll need to adjust those numbers accordingly. So let's go to the common control assign interface. Make sure we have common knob 5 selected, then I can just hit the plus gadget and tell it to control part 2 assign 1 to replicate the part 1 assign 1 destination from Apollo, adjusting for the fact that the first part of Apollo now lives in part 2. I can see that the onward routing for the assignment is already pre-filled. It's doing something to the operator level of one or more of the operators, and the curve type and the ratio and the parameters are already configured for us, so we don't need to do anything more to reconstruct that assignment. I'm going to pause here to give you a masterclass in how to read these control assignments. Let's head back to E.S.P for a moment because it provides a nice interface to look at how assignments are laid out. Beginning with assignments at the part level, with the display filter set to all, the first thing I want to point out is that each of the control assignments is numbered. For this part, we have destinations numbered from 1 to 8. Destinations are numbered according to when in the sound design process they were assigned. So in this part, the first assignment the designer made was for the operator level to be controlled by assign knob 1, and the last assignment they made was for the reverb send level to be controlled by assignable switch 2. The destination numbers are important because there are actually a finite number of destinations available for parts, although that limit is 32, so you're unlikely to need to exceed it. If we switch the display filter to something more specific, like the super knob, you'll see that only some of those 8 destinations show up, but we can see that the numbers are not necessarily sequential, with numbers 1, 4, 5 and 6 shown here, which lets us know that there are other destinations that are not being shown because of the current display filter. If I change the display filter back to all to show all the assigned destinations for this part, let's go through what we're looking at. The first box for each destination shows us its source, that being the controller that is assigned to this destination. Here we can see that the first assignable knob for the part is the source for destination 1, and the mod wheel is the source for destinations 2 and 3. Next, we have the destination itself, which tells you what sound parameter is being controlled. These often have rather terse abbreviations, so you may need to refer to the montage reference guide to find out what they all mean. But in this part, destinations 1 and 5 control op level, or the volume level of the individual operators in this FMX part, while destination 2 controls the variation send level, and destinations 3 and 4 both modify the dry-wet mix level for insert effect B. Below the destination is the ratio. As the value of the source controller changes from its minimum to its maximum, you can imagine it tracing a path along the graph from left to right. The degree to which it modifies the destination parameter is defined by the ratio, and this is reflected by the solid green area in the graph. As the source controller value changes, it will follow the graph and affect the destination parameter according to how far away from the vertical center line it deviates. At the vertical center, the destination parameter will not be modified at all. A more extreme ratio will push the curve further towards the upper or lower limits of the graph. Destination 4 has a nice easy graph to read. When the source, assignable knob 2, is at its minimum, it will affect the destination parameter according to the position of the curve on the far left of the graph, which in this case is right on the center line, so it won't do anything. As the source controller increases in value, we move along the graph from left to right, following the curve, and we can see that the modulation of the destination parameter is going to be gradually increasing until we reach the maximum value of assignable knob 2 at the far right of the graph, where the curve reaches the top right corner, indicating that the destination parameter will also be pushed to its maximum. If we don't want the destination parameter to ever reach its maximum, we can decrease the ratio, and you'll see that the curve never reaches the top edge of the graph. Or we could boost the ratio way up, and now the destination parameter will reach its maximum long before the source controller reaches its own maximum. Alternatively, we could reduce the ratio below 0, and now the destination parameter will decrease as the value of the source controller increases. The curve in the graph can be set as unidirectional or bidirectional. A unidirectional curve will start at an effective ratio of 0 on the left and move gradually towards its maximum ratio on the right, while a bidirectional curve will begin with the negative value of the ratio on the left, move through 0 in the middle, and continue towards the maximum ratio on the right. All of these destinations use the standard curve type, but there's a big selection of different curves available to suit your needs, including a bell curve so that you can have your destination parameter rise and then fall back as the source controller changes. There's also more complex curves such as saw waves, sequences, and tilt sine waves, which allow you to affect your destination parameters in all sorts of wild ways. Each curve will have one or more parameters, which affect the shape of the graph. For the standard curve type, param 1 will change the straight line into a convex or concave shape so that you can have your destination parameter accelerate or decelerate its modulation as the source controller is used. The more exotic curves have their own uses for parameters, like affecting the amplitude and frequency of the waves in the tilt sine curve. Sometimes there will be additional controls for the destination which let you fine-tune the way in which the destination is affected. Here we can see that the operator level destination exposes an operator control which lets us configure which operators should be affected by the source controller. Other examples of these extra controls would be the ability to target either or both of the filters for ANX parts. Moving away from part level destinations to common assignments, the display can become slightly more confusing because there may be multiple boxes labeled destination for each assignment. Here, the first assignment has a source controller of assignable knob 1 and a destination of part 1 assign 1. This part X assign Y naming scheme refers to a particular assignable knob belonging to a part. So part 1 assign 1 means the first assignable knob for part 1, while part 4 assign 6 means the sixth assignable knob for the fourth performance part. The second destination box tells you how many destinations are attached to the part level knob at which the common level knob is pointing. Here you can see that the second common knob points to part 1 assign 2, or the second part level knob for part 1, and that part level knob actually has two destinations, those being the dry-wet balance for insert effect B and the degree of spread for insert effect A. I can jump back to the part level destinations from here to verify that, and here we can see that assign knob 2 for part 1 does indeed have two separate destinations. Back at the common level, and next to the number of destinations for the part level knob, we have a summary of what each part level destination does, along with the graph controls we just talked about. It's important to note that these controls are not separate from the part level controls being targeted. So if I change anything related to the part level assignment here, I'll see the same changes if I inspect that part level assignment directly. Any additional controls for the destination, such as the ability to select which operators or which filters are affected by the source controller, are not shown on the common view, but you can quickly jump to the part level assignment from here if you need to make adjustments. I'm going to switch to a more complex performance now because the common knob assignments here all point to part level assignments, but that's not always the case. In this performance, we can see various assignments for the common knobs to part level destinations as before, but we can also see performance level destinations that do not map to assignments within individual parts. Here, assign knob 1 is set to control the first reverb pitch parameter for the shimmer reverb, while assign knob 3 modifies the shimmer reverb gain. All the parameters for these performance level assignments and controls are shown right here, rather than having to jump to the part level assignment to edit the finer details. Okay, hopefully that's all clear, so let's get on with reassigning common controls to our imported Apollo performance. Apollo is a slightly odd example because, as I mentioned, its first common assignable knob actually has two destinations. So let's hit the plus again, and this time we'll point it to part 2 assign 5 to replicate the Apollo assignment that was originally for part 1 assign 5. And again, all the destination configuration is completed for us. Apollo's second common assignable knob controlled part 1 assign 2. So our next common knob, which is number 6, will need to point to part 2 assign 2. Moving on to Apollo's third assignable knob, which we'll have to substitute with knob 7 in this performance, I'm going to show you a useful tip when rebuilding these assignments. Let's pretend for a moment that I don't have access to my E.S.P reference and I haven't made any notes regarding how the common assignments are made. Let's hit the plus gadget again and select the next destination from part 2. We already made assignments to part 2 assign 1 and part 2 assign 2, so let's select part 2 assign 3. When we do so, it's clear that there are no assignments made here, as you can see from the absence of an actual destination in the display, so we need to skip over knob 3 from part 2. I'll make sure that the destination box is selected, and then I can use the increment or decrement buttons or the data dial to quickly jump to the next part level knob. As I skip through, I can see that there are no assignments for knob 4 either. Part 2 assign 5 has an assignment, but we already assigned that to the 5th common knob along with part 2 assign 1, so we can skip that too. In fact, there are no more assignments for the remainder of part 2, and if I keep on incrementing the destination, it'll move on to the next part, part 3. There are no assignments for part 3 assign 1 or part 3 assign 2, but when we get to part 3 assign 3, we get a proper destination. So this will be the destination for the common level knob with which we're currently working, knob 7. But before we move on, let's continue skipping through the part 3 assignments to see what else there is. There is an assignment for part 3 assign 4, so we're going to need to map that to our final common knob, and hope that there are no more destinations set up for this part. Part 3 assignments 5, 6, 7 and 8 are all empty, so we're in the clear. We have enough common knobs to fully map all the necessary assignments here, so let's use the information we've gained and assign part 3 assign 3 to knob 7, and in knob 8 we'll map part 3 assign 4. We're nearly done here, but there's one more thing to do. In the original Apollo performance, the super knob is linked to all the assignable knobs, but only 4 of them actually have assignments. So the final 4 links are redundant, which is just a bit of lazy programming from the sound designer. But if we want our new performance to work in the same way, we're going to have to restore super knob link to our newly assigned common knobs. I'll turn on super knob link for knobs 5, 6, 7 and 8, which control the Apollo parts, and now they respond correctly. But if we refer back to the original Apollo, we can see that the first knob actually only moves to the halfway point when we move the super knob to max. Let's get the actual figures for that by going to the super knob tab in E.S.P, and we can see that knob 1 moves from 0 to 512, which is exactly halfway. We can replicate that here by going to Home, Motion Control, Super Knob, and then changing the green maximum value for our equivalent knob, 5, to 512. Now, when we move the super knob to the maximum, knob 5 only reaches its halfway point, correctly reproducing the original behavior. While we're here, I think I should point out one of Montage M's new features. Apart from the fact that Montage M now allows knobs to move in a range of 0 to 1023, allowing much finer adjustments than the 0 to 127 offered by the classic Montage and MODX, there's a nice new addition to the super knobs repertoire. In the previous video, I showed you how you can configure individual common assignable knobs to move between 2 different positions when the super knob is adjusted. So you could have a knob move from 0 to 1023 and perfectly copy the super knob's movement, or it could move between 1023 and 0, essentially reversing the super knob's movement, or anywhere in between, as we have with assigned knob 5, which is currently only travelling halfway when the super knob reaches its maximum. Montage M expands on this by allowing the knobs to move between 3 states with the addition of a mid position. So you could have an assignable knob start at 0 when the super knob is fully left, then move right up to its maximum 1023 when the super knob reaches its mid position, and then fall back to some other value when the super knob is fully right. Let's enable super knob mid and set it to an actual mid position, and have our 4th assignable knob, which currently controls the sync pitch for the ANX pad, do just that. I'll dial in its right position to, let's say, somewhere around 750-ish, and then set its mid position right up to 1023. So what we now have is a rapid rise for knob 4, going all the way to its maximum when the super knob is in its mid position, before it falls back as the super knob reaches its fully right position. Just to add even more power to this, you can configure whereabouts in the super knob's movement the mid position is considered to be. So if we set that to, let's say, 256, then as you move the super knob, the knobs that are working with the mid position will very rapidly reach their mid position before slowly continuing on to the right position. Let's hear that. While remapping the common assignments for Apollo was relatively straightforward because all of the part level knob assignments were also mapped to common knobs, it's important to be aware that the montage system allows a lot of freedom in how parameters are controlled, and in some preset performances you may find that there are assignments to part level knobs that are not mapped to the common knobs and can only be controlled while that part is directly selected. Let's quickly take a look at the CFX2 performance, where the super knob primarily controls the new shimmer reverb effect. Looking at the assignments for the common knobs, we have a full quota of 8 knobs assigned, but if you look closely, only 3 of them actually point to part level assignments. The remainder of the knobs control performance level effects parameters, which aren't directly related to the piano part itself, and here comes the first of the gotchas. All of these effects parameters control the reverb effect set in this performance, namely shimmer reverb. When we merge CFX2 into another performance, the common effects are not brought with it, because the performance into which we merge will already have its own effects set up. Therefore, in order to fully duplicate the sound of CFX2 when it's merged into another performance, we would need to also set up the shimmer reverb and duplicate its settings as set up in the CFX2 performance. If we switch over to look at the part level assignments, once again we can see that all 8 knobs are assigned, but clearly some of those aren't controllable at the common or performance level, because as we saw, only 3 common knobs point at assignments from part 1, and only 2 of those have super knob link. Switching back to the performance we've been building, I'm going to get rid of the common assignments for all of the Apollo knobs, so that we have 4 spare common knobs. I'm going to merge CFX2 into this performance, but just to be clear, I'm doing this as a sort of worst case scenario demo, because merging a really complex performance like CFX2 into a simple ANX performance is bordering on insanity. In the real world, if you wanted to build a performance and include CFX2, then you should start with CFX2 and add more parts to it, rather than try to merge CFX2 and all its programming into your performance. That said, and in the spirit of learning, science and adventure, I will merge CFX2 into the 4th performance part. Now we can look at using the assignment destination search approach that we previously used for Apollo to see about getting the common assignments set up. I'll select common, hit edit, and we're in the control assign interface. I'll make sure that common knob 5 is selected, and then set a destination of part 4, that being where CFX2 is living, assign 1. And this brings us to the second gotcha. The CFX2 part has a destination set up for its first assignable knob, but as we saw when we looked just now, this knob isn't actually controlled at the common level and can only be manipulated when the part is directly selected. But looking at it here, we would have no way of knowing that without looking back at E.S.P or some written notes. Moving on, we can see that there are also destinations for assign 2, assign 3, assign 4, right up to assign 8. But again, without something to which to refer, there's no way of knowing which of these should be exposed at the common level. So you do need to be vigilant when reconstructing these common level assignments if you want to correctly duplicate common assignments made in the source performance. Next, I want to go back to the subject of aftertouch. The MONTAGE M synthesis engines can respond to polyphonic aftertouch, and many of the new performances make use of it. But several of the older performances, and many of the new ones, use channel or monophonic aftertouch. Only the M8X can actually trigger polyphonic aftertouch from its own keyboard, but it has to set the aftertouch mode at the performance level. Which means that if you have the keyboard set to poly aftertouch mode, it won't trigger channel aftertouch, and if you have it set to channel aftertouch mode, it won't trigger poly aftertouch. This becomes a problem when you build a performance that contains parts that are programmed to use different aftertouch types. Let's start with CS Dreams, which is a pad that uses polyphonic aftertouch. And into that we'll merge the Oxygen performance, which is programmed with channel aftertouch. Because Oxygen was merged into CS Dreams, the keyboard is set to poly aftertouch mode, and the channel aftertouch effect for Oxygen is never triggered. Now you could get around this by setting up an external keyboard that's capable of channel aftertouch to play Oxygen over MIDI and just leave the built-in keyboard to play CS Dreams. But a more elegant solution is to reprogram the merged part to respond to the other aftertouch type. Let's take a look at how Oxygen is set up. I'll jump into the controller sign interface for the Oxygen part and set the display filter to channel aftertouch. Here I can see what's going on. There are two destinations. The first is for LFO2 PMD, which is the pitch modulation depth for the second LFO. It has a ratio of +8 and a standard parameter of 5. The second destination is for LFO2 AMD, or amplitude modulation depth. This time we have a ratio of +14, and again parameter 1 is set to the standard 5. If we want Oxygen to respond to polyphonic aftertouch, we're going to need to replicate these assignments in the aftertouch control panel. Annoyingly, the user controller to assign method doesn't currently work in poly aftertouch mode, so rather than going to the navigation overview, selecting the parameter we want, hitting control assign and then pressing a key into aftertouch to make the assignment, we're going to have to do this the long way instead. I'm going to open up the aftertouch assignment panel for the Oxygen part, hit the plus gadget to make an assignment, and set the first assignment to FM param LFO PMD. And just like the previous channel aftertouch assignment, I'll set the ratio to +8, and the rest I can leave as is. I'll hit the plus again, and this time we'll set it to FM param LFO2 AMD. This time the ratio is +14. Let's hear that in action. I'll just turn down all of the CS Dreams parts so we can hear it. So that's now responding to polyphonic aftertouch, and if I bring CS Dreams back in, both parts are now responding to polyphonic aftertouch. Of course, the M6 and M7 can't play polyphonic aftertouch, so for you guys, we need to do something in reverse to make CS Dreams respond to channel aftertouch. We'll start by setting the keyboard aftertouch mode to channel, and now CS Dreams won't respond to aftertouch at all. The only aftertouch response you can hear there is the original channel aftertouch programming for Oxygen. CS Dreams occupies 3 performance parts, and if we look at their assignments, we can see that each part assigns filter cutoff to polyphonic aftertouch with varying ratios. Parts 1 and 2 have a ratio of +30, and part 3 has a ratio of +25. Let's get those replicated with channel aftertouch. We'll start with part 1. This time we can use the navigation overview. We'll select the filter and then the cutoff, hit Control Assign, and then press any key right down into aftertouch to make the assignment. We'll adjust the ratio to +30, and we're done. We'll do the same for parts 2 and 3, setting the ratio as we go. This is part 2, it has +30, And finally, part 3 has a ratio of +25. And now we have CS Dreams responding to channel aftertouch. Of course, going from polyphonic to channel aftertouch does mean that you lose some expressive capabilities, but if you have an M6 or M7, that's better than no aftertouch response at all, right? On a side note, I do wish that Yamaha would provide a shortcut to move polyphonic aftertouch assignments to channel aftertouch and vice versa, or even better, have a switch to allow parts with poly aftertouch to respond to channel aftertouch messages, and parts with channel aftertouch to respond to poly aftertouch when you want them to. I have an IdeaScale suggestion on that subject, and if you'd like to add your comments and vote for it, I've left a link in the description and at the top of the screen over there for you, and I have a video coming up soon where I'll show you some interesting experiments I've been doing on the subject. Finally today, I'm going to do a little demo in response to a question I got on one of the Montage Facebook groups. The challenge is to take the cinematic flutes performance and change it so that the flutter effect is triggered by polyphonic aftertouch rather than its default trigger, which happens when you play a note with very high velocity. Let's dig into that using E.S.P so we can get a really good overview of what's going on with the performance. The first thing to do is to identify where the flutter sound comes from when you play notes hard, so let's do that now. Being colorblind, this is actually really difficult for me because the color scheme used for the volume level meters in E.S.P and on Montage M is so ridiculously inaccessible, but if I look really hard, I can see that the meter for part 6 only shows activity when I play hard, so it's a pretty decent bet that the flutter sound comes from there. Let's mute part 6 and see if any sign of the flutter remains when I play hard. And it doesn't, so now we can be sure that part 6 is the source of the flutter. I'm going to select part 6 and inspect how it's set up. Straight away I can see that it's an AWM2 or sample-based part, and it has 4 active elements. The inactive ones use the default CF3 stretch waveform and have the switch disabled. All 4 of the active elements use the flute 4 flutter waveform, and they are set to only trigger when the keys are hit with a velocity between 119 and 127, so that's right at the top of the velocity range, meaning that you'll have to really hammer the keys to make them sound. We can confirm that by playing at different velocities and watching the little activity dots next to each element, which only light up when the element is triggered. Elements 1 and 2 have a volume level of 96 from the potential maximum of 127, and they're panned slightly left. But elements 3 and 4 have their level set to 0, so they won't make a sound at all unless a control somewhere raises their volume level. We'll get to that in a minute. Each of the active elements covers a slightly different range of keys, but they're all in the upper range, which makes sense as this is a flute and flutes can't generally play notes below middle C, so these ranges actually go beyond what flutes can normally play. Now I'm intrigued by elements 3 and 4 because I can see that they're triggered to play, and if I inspect the element oscillator tune section, I can see that they're tuned an octave down, but that 0 volume level means that they're not making any sound. If they're going to be heard, there must be a control assigned to the element level somewhere, and of course we can quickly find out if that's the case by looking at the assignments for the part. So with part 6 selected, let's start by looking at the aftertouch overview, and there are no control assignments there, so that's not going to raise the element level. Next, let's switch to the control assign panel and change the display filter to all so that we can see every control that's assigned. I can see that there are 6 control assignments, and the 4th of these controls element level, so perhaps this is what we've been looking for. It appears that with the assign switch 1 active, the element level is raised by a ratio of +48. I haven't really covered the assignable switches yet, but for now all you need to remember is that they are on-off controls, so it doesn't matter what sort of curve is used for the assignment, the value is just going to jump directly from the minimum to the maximum values as defined by the ratio, rather than smoothly transitioning between them. For some reason, the assignable switches aren't actually implemented as controls within E.S.P, so we can't turn it on using the E.S.P interface to hear what it does. But what we can do is look at which elements it is programmed to control. And it appears that it's set to control elements 5, 6, 7 and 8, which we know are inactive, so that's not actually going to do anything. Furthermore, there's another destination for assigned switch 1, that being the part volume, and that's set to drop the volume of the entire part way down to below 0 when it's active, so that element level assignment would be completely redundant even if it did target elements 3 and 4. But essentially, elements 3 and 4 are silent, and nothing in this performance will cause them to make a sound even though they are triggered by high velocities. This is an example of junk being left behind when the sound designer built this performance. Perhaps the designer started off with an octave doubled flutter effect, but changed their mind for the final version and forgot to remove the unused elements. In fact, this isn't the only useless clutter in this performance. Looking at the common control assignments, I can see that knob 8 points to part 7 assign 8, despite the fact that the performance doesn't have a 7th part, and another assignment to part 4 assign 8, but part 8 doesn't have an assignment to its 8th knob, as you can see from the empty box. We could safely delete both of these assignments. Whatever the reason why the designer didn't clean up the useless stuff, we'll still need to be careful when we reconfigure this performance if we want to keep part 6 elements 3 and 4 silent. So, back to the task at hand, and we're now going to take the flutter sound and change it so that it triggers with aftertouch instead of high velocity. I'm going to do that in E.S.P to begin with, and then we'll move over to the montage and do it with the hardware, although the process will be basically the same. The first thing to do is going to be to remove the velocity limit of the flutter elements, so that they can be used regardless of how hard the keys are pressed. I'll take the lower velocity limit for all of the flutter elements and reduce it from 119 to 0, so now the flutter will sound even if we play very softly. Of course, that's only part of the process, because we don't want to hear the flutter unless we trigger it with aftertouch, so I'll reduce the level for all the flutter elements to 0, and now we won't hear the flutter at all. Next, we need to go to the aftertouch panel and create a new assignment with the plus gadget. It defaults to pitch, so we need to change that to element level. And with that done, we can now play the flutter effect by pressing the keys into aftertouch. But remember that I said we need to be careful to keep elements 3 and 4 silent. All of the active elements in part 6 now have a level of 0, but right now our aftertouch assignment is targeting all of them, so it's not just raising the level of elements 1 and 2, it's also raising the level of elements 3 and 4, giving us an octave doubled flutter sound. If we want to keep the flutter effect sounding the same as it did previously, we'll need to click on the element button and turn off control for all but the first 2 elements. And now it's working as it should. Let's do the same with the hardware. The actual parameters we need to edit are identical, but they're spread out in different areas of the interface. We'll start off by editing part 6, then I'll press Shift and the first part button to switch to element 1, and then I'll open the oscillator tune section. Here I need to change the lower velocity limit from 119 to the lowest it will go, which is 1. Then I can use Shift and the second part button to switch the remaining elements to all have that same element velocity limit. Now the flutter will play regardless of the key velocity. Next, we have to reduce the element level to 0 for elements 1 and 2. So let's hit Shift and the first part button again to bring up element 1, and then we'll switch to the Amplitude tab and the Level Pan section within it, where we can select the level. We'll set that to 0, and then do the same for element 2. and now the flutter is completely inaudible. Finally, we need to select the part level settings rather than any of the individual elements, so we'll press Shift and Common. From here we can go to Mod, Control and Aftertouch, then hit the plus gadget to make an assignment. The destination by default is pitch, but we need to point it to element level, and we need it to trigger only elements 1 and 2, so we'll turn off control for everything except 1 and 2. Now we can play the flutter with aftertouch, regardless of the velocity with which we strike the keys. If you're an M6 or M7 owner, you could also do this with channel aftertouch by switching the aftertouch mode to channel and then using the control assign panel and creating the same assignments to element level, remembering to turn off control for all but the first 2 elements. Well, I think that just about wraps things up for this video. If you followed from the start, you should now understand how the SuperKnob assignment shortcut makes use of the first unassigned common and part level knobs to create its control chain. You should also have some more ideas regarding how to rebuild common control assignments for parts merged into your performances, including how to quickly sift through part level control assignments to work out what you need to reattach to common level assignable knobs. I've talked about the new mid position for the SuperKnob and how you can use it to have common knobs move in 2 different directions or at 2 different speeds as the SuperKnob is turned. You should be able to replicate aftertouch assignments between polyphonic and channel aftertouch modes, and you'll have a head start in understanding how to take sound elements that are triggered by velocity or some other factor and move them to aftertouch or any other control source. I hope you've enjoyed both of these control assign videos. Please do leave a comment telling me how you got on when following them, or if you have any related questions, and I'll be back soon with a video helping you to demystify Montage M.